Before we dive into our topic today, please just take a moment to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like this show, and leave a comment. It really does help support the channel. Okay, welcome to the debate. Today we're tackling a really critical phenomenon that's shaping contemporary self-development. It's this increasing migration of personal practices, our wellness pursuits, mental health routines, even our intellectual habits, from a private internal space into a very visible public performance.
And this shift is so crucial because it brings up these fundamental questions about sincerity and motivation in the digital age. We're looking at a culture where, as the source material suggests, lifestyle is no longer just lived, it's performed.
Exactly. So the central question for our debate today is, I think, quite stark. Does this demand for external visibility, for the aesthetic curation of these deeply personal habits, does it inevitably compromise their genuine substance, their utility for personal growth? I'm going to argue that yes, the pursuit of external validation fundamentally corrupts the practice itself. It leads to what I would call fake effort and ultimately just an illusion of progress.
And I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle. While I absolutely acknowledge the pervasiveness of performativity, and yes, its potential to promote superficiality, I think framing this dynamic entirely as corruption is, well, it's overly reductive. It's too cynical. Performance and signaling, they're complex social mechanisms, especially in a culture obsessed with visibility. So, far from diminishing these habits, I'll contend that the external expression can actually reinforce structure, drive accountability, and can be integrated into a sustainable path toward development.
I can see why you'd frame it as a functional mechanism, but my core position really centers on this danger of hollowness, when the symbol, the carefully staged photo, the public declaration becomes more important than the actual internal experience. The habit is it's fundamentally hollowed out. It stops serving the self and instead serves an external audience. And then the activity itself gets engineered for visibility, which is often, the very opposite of the quiet consistency you need for authentic benefit. Just consider the evidence the source provides on morning routines. We see this theatrical ritual where, a simple glass of electrolyte water or some exotic matcha is transformed into an existential necessity. It becomes a personality trait. All the effort goes into staging that moment. And when the effort of curating the photo is greater than the effort of the activity itself, the entire motivational basis shifts from an intrinsic reward, like health or mindfulness, to an extrinsic one, likes, validation, status. And that structural shift right there, that's where the corruption begins.
That analysis makes a very powerful case, I'll grant you, for the dangers of extrinsic motivation. Yet I think it unfairly dismisses the complex reality of how habits are formed in the modern world. We can't just ignore our social reality. Our cities, our digital platforms, they are, by their very design, entertainment-driven. For many people, especially those who struggle with consistency, that external performance can be a necessary mechanism. It provides the structure, the public commitment needed to establish discipline in the first place. Let's take your point on well-being, specifically mental health. You cite therapy being used as branding, a badge of sophistication. Okay, fair enough. The performance of therapy can certainly be superficial, but doesn't the public acknowledgement of doing that inner work, even if it's initially driven by status, doesn't that democratize the whole concept? If signaling the practice encourages more people to actually start therapy, then that external performance is serving as a pretty powerful gateway. The utility is realized despite the potential vanity, not negated by it.
That's an interesting point about the gateway effect, though I would frame it very differently. The democratization of the symbol doesn't guarantee the democratization of the substance. If I'm using the concept of my emotional complexity just as social currency, then the internal work is inherently jeopardized. We're talking about activities where deep transformation requires, well, vulnerability. It requires a lack of an audience. If I'm perpetually thinking about the future caption or the reaction to my vulnerability, I'm not actually being vulnerable to myself or to the process. I'm just optimizing my narrative for public consumption. We have to analyze the distinction in intent very carefully here. If the primary motivation shifts from a genuine internal challenge to audience management, the practice is rendered fake effort. We're not just debating a difference in emphasis. We are debating a fundamental reordering of priorities that puts the appearance of a virtuous life over the actual living of it.
I'm sorry. I just don't buy that the intent is ever so rigidly separated into pure and corrupt. Let me tell you why. In a world where visibility is sort of the default setting, establishing good habits often requires that external scaffolding. I think we often confuse the desire for accountability with a simple desire for vanity. Think about fitness. You argue that the motivation is just the selfie afterward, but gyms themselves, as the material points out, are designed as immersive entertainment spaces. The environment encourages outward display. So if that performative atmosphere, that external pressure, helps someone achieve physical consistency, ensuring the workout did actually happen, then the value is substantive. We shouldn't romanticize this idea that only activities performed in, monastic isolation are valid. If I need a public commitment to maintain my cardiovascular health, that social layer is functional, not corrosive.
I acknowledge the functional role of external commitment, but that function often creates a dependency. It prevents the development of resilient, intrinsic discipline. This is precisely where the concept of fake effort really gains traction when we allocate our time, our resources, our mental energy to optimizing the optics rather than the core task. Well, that allocation proves our real intent. Let's apply this to intellectual pursuits. The material mentions people buying novels or philosophy, not necessarily to read them, but to photograph them. Okay, when I spend $40 on a dense book and then invest an hour staging a shot of it next to a coffee mug, but I never actually engage with the text, my actions demonstrate that the budget for aesthetics has completely overruled the budget for curiosity. The goal has shifted from acquiring knowledge to acquiring the look of a thoughtful person, the audience we imagine watching us.
That is a compelling argument on resource allocation, but you are assuming it's a zero-sum game, that the aesthetic effort necessarily subtracts from the intellectual effort. I think we have to explore the possibility of integration. For many people, communicating identity is just inseparable from social media. So if the public performance of reading, photographing the book, acts as a commitment device, a sort of public promise to engage with it, it might provide the initial momentum needed to overcome inertia. And let's look at the economics of the aesthetic stage. Take cafe culture. You say it's optimized for the photograph, making conversation secondary, but the cafe is a third space. It facilitates work and connection. The aesthetic optimization benefits the venue, which in turn encourages us to use these places. The performance can create a positive feedback loop for the setting of the habit.
So while the conversation might not be a deep dive on Kant, the social engagement is still real. It generates tangible social capital. Why must we define substance so narrowly that only silent, focused activity counts?
The reason we have to maintain a rigorous definition of substance is because superficiality is profitable and depth often isn't. The performance economy thrives on things that are instantly digestible, visually appealing. If the substance of a habit, be it complex philosophy or slow, tedious emotional processing, is difficult to render visually, it will naturally be subordinated to what can be photographed.
And that is the critical danger of this aesthetic stage. It creates an illusion of having an enviable, dynamic life without requiring the deep, messy, and often monotonous work that defines meaningful progress. True habits, the ones that fundamentally reshape us, they thrive on anonymity, on consistency. They are patient. The performance economy demands instant gratification and external approval, which is fundamentally corrosive to patience.
I agree that the quick fix nature of external approval poses a real challenge to resilience, but I think you risk overly romanticizing anonymity. I mean, for many people, especially those from historically marginalized groups, visibility isn't a vanity project. It is necessary for recognition, for validation. We have to be careful not to create a definition of authenticity that's only accessible to those who can afford to be quiet and invisible. And this concept of being hollowed out implies the underlying practice is totally replaced. I argue integration is possible. The public commitment, the post, the signal, it functions like an external operating system, ensuring the private software, the internal discipline, runs consistently. The challenge, of course, is ensuring the internal driver, the actual desire for strength or knowledge, remains the priority, even while you're leveraging that external system for motivation.
That integration sounds appealing in theory, but I find the evidence suggests integration is rare and substitution is common. When people start using therapeutic language concepts like boundaries or self-care as a performance tool, they are often using the vocabulary of emotional maturity to mask a deep resistance to the actual hard work. The badge becomes a shield, not an indication of victory. And that substitution is what fundamentally corrupts the practice's utility. So my conclusion comes back to the internal logic of self-respect. In a culture that is so obsessed with performance, choosing real, quiet habits that don't look glamorous, that don't demand public applause, I think that is the most radical act of self-respect. Authentic self-development has to be disconnected from the feedback loop of instant validation. It demands patience and consistency, precisely because it's reshaping us from the inside out in ways that are often uninteresting to an external audience.
I agree that the ultimate source of sustainment has to be intrinsic. I do. However, I still maintain that your position sets up too rigid of a dichotomy. This shift we're seeing reflects deeper societal transformations in how identity is constructed. The challenge isn't to retreat entirely into a private sphere, which is almost impossible now, but to strategically manage our visibility. We have to acknowledge that performance is now just an integrated, complex psychological reality. The material gives a critical warning, yes, against the seduction of superficiality. But we have to resist labeling all external signaling as universally corrosive. If the performance leads to the completion of the act and the benefit is realized, then the practice holds substantive value, even if the impetus was, well, mixed. We need a more nuanced framework for motivation than just labeling one side pure and the other corrupt.
The discussion then really illuminates this critical tension in contemporary life. How do we cultivate substantive, slow burn growth when the value system all around us demands instant visibility, when it dictates the terms of what is even considered valuable? The answer, I think, requires a deeply discerning approach to our own personal motivations and a very careful policing of the intent behind our most sacred practices. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notification bell, like, and leave a comment to support the channel.